Welcome to Dialogues in Afro-Latinidad, a podcast dedicated to amplifying and elevating Afro-Latinx histories, cultures, and communities across the Americas and beyond. I'm your host, Dr. Michelle Reed Vasquez. Join us for conversations with experts and artists to learn more about Afro-Latinidad. Venga! So today's guest is Janel Martinez. She's a writer, communication specialist, and the founder of the award-winning blog, Ain't I Latina? It's an online destination celebrating Afro-Latinx womanhood. This Bronx, New York native penned Abuela's Greatest Gift in the YA anthology Wild Tongues Can't Be Tamed, published by Flatiron Books. She has also appeared as a featured guest on national shows and outlets such as MSNBC's The Culture is Latina, BuzzFeed, Essence, NPR, SiriusXM, and her work has appeared in Adweek, Univision Communications, Oprah Daily, Refinery 29, Remezcla, and the New York Times, among many others. So, Janelle, thank you for joining me today and welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, Michelle, for the warm introduction. I'm really honored to be in conversation with you. So thank you again.
Well, the honor is all mine. So you grew up in the Bronx and now
Mhm.
you're this award-winning writer. So how did you become interested in enhancing the visibility, the experiences of Afro-Latinx communities, especially here in the US?
Yeah, so love the Bronx. I feel like there's so many just phenomenal people that come from the Bronx. And I love the creativity of the Bronx. And so I always mention just how influential the Bronx has been in my life, not just because I was born, raised, and actually still reside here,
Mhm.
but simply because I feel like there's a perception of the Bronx. And truthfully, it has shaped me in so many different ways. So I appreciate you noting that I'm from the Boogie Town. And so kind of taking it there to my household. I was raised, I mentioned in the Bronx by two Garifuna, um, via Honduras immigrant parents.
Mhm. Mhm.
And so in my household, that was very much so prevalent. I didn't even think it was a thing, right? I just knew that that was my lived experience, right? Like I heard my parents speaking Garifuna to one another, to family members. We ate tons of, our cuisine from hudutu to keke and just a number of things. And so I mention that because that's what's happening in my household.
Mhm.
But being that I have a hyphenated identity, being raised in the Bronx and being American, I also, growing up, was very much so into media,
Mm.
watching the news with my parents, watching shows of the 90s, quintessential 90s shows like The Fresh Prince of Bel-Air,
Mhm. Mhm.
Parenthood. Also was really into like sort of towards the end of the 90s, early 2000s. Um, Total Request Live on MTV and 106 in Park. And so like media was something that was really um something that I enjoyed.
Mhm.
Magazines. It's interesting. My mom, she even had a subscription to Jet magazine, and so like I would rush. I remember rushing to the mailbox to
Yep.
see that new issue. I wanted to
Mhm.
be a Jet Beauty of the Week
Of
for
course.
many for many years. So these are things that I'm like being that I'm exposed to,
Mhm.
but also that I'm being exposed to these various forms of media. I'm realizing that I know how I'm being raised. I see like especially specifically women in my life. Like I see, my mom, I see my abuela, I see my aunts. Um, but on TV, like who
Yeah.
is outwardly claiming that they are, and of course, this term wasn't in my vocabulary, but Afro Latina, a
Mhm.
Black Latina, right?
Mhm.
I wasn't seeing that, but I will say I did see, specifically on the Parenthood, for example,
Mm.
Reagan Gomez, right? The last thing, because I was one of those kids that I would watch the closing credits. And so I'm like,
Okay.
Gomez. like,
Understood.
oh, like I know Gomez's, right? And,
Mhm, mhm,
seeing that Reagan was a Black woman. And so all of that was really shaping me. Even in magazines, I would see in Vibe someone, that had what we would consider, and of course, you don't have to have a certain last name to be of Latin American descent, but at that time for me, that was like something that I would be looking for. And so I would see that in sort of this, hip hop that I was consuming, but again, the term wasn't there for me. And so all of that really kind of led me to wanting to be a storyteller. I knew I wanted to be in communications, wasn't 100% sure what aspect or lane of communications, but I ended up fast forwarding when I was in undergrad. I went to Syracuse University and I majored in magazine journalism. So I was in the communications school, which was a phenomenal program and really has made me the storyteller and the journalist that I am.
mhm,
But I knew at that time too, because speaking of higher education, I was one of like a handful of Black students and specifically Black women in my program. And so I knew it was really important for me to tell our stories. And it was really at that time that I was like, okay, I'm going to write, Black stories. I'm going to report on our community with a specific focus on, Latin Americanness in the United States. And that actually led me to an internship. And maybe should I talk about this? This is an internship that really, I think, led me to the path of starting Inca Latina, though I didn't know it at the time.
mhm.
And so I actually got this. Oh, sorry, I don't want to cut you off.
No, 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 I was just gonna say, sounds like this is one of those defining moments, defining
Yes.
experiences. So, yes, please share that.
Yeah, absolutely. And so, um, like, as I mentioned, I would look at like, the closing credits. I also studied like the mastheads of
Mm,
magazines, and I noticed that an an Afro-Latina editor who had been a writer that I admired coming of age. Actually, shout out to Mimi Valdez, and I saw that she was going to be, or she had become and was the editor in chief of this magazine, a well known Latina publication at the time. And I was like, oh, I want to, because I knew that this is the work that I wanted to do. I was like,
mhm,
I need to be there with her.
mhm, yes, yes.
And so I applied to this internship and found out that I landed it. And it was such an eye opening experience. For one, I thought that like it was a small but mighty team. Um, of course, the focus was, on Latinas, if you will,
Mhm, mhm,
but I already came into that experience as a consumer and knowing that like I felt like there was room for more Afro Latinas or,
mhm,
Afro Latina people to be recognized
mhm, mhm,
and or at least to be reflected in the pages of the magazine. And had a very insightful experience. I learned so much as an intern there that led me actually to future opportunities. But there was one conversation that I had where and when I look back on this experience, I don't necessarily know if the editor, um, she may have just been, speaking to what she thought, but
mhm.
I basically had the conversation around wanting to see more people that look like me in the pages,
Yes.
and it was mentioned. I basically left the conversation feeling like. The outlet felt like there was already enough representation there of Afro
Wow,
Latina people.
wow.
And I will say that that outlet did have Black folks on the cover. It usually was the same people, same complexion.
Mhm,
And I took that from that conversation that, okay, this is what it is here, but
Mhm.
it may look different elsewhere. And I actually felt like I was waiting for a while for someone to create something that really
Mm.
spoke to that pain point for
Mhm.
me.
Mhm.
And ultimately, I was like, okay, I don't need to wait around for it. Cause I also was
Right.
at working in media and actually worked at a well known African American publication that focused on wealth building, entrepreneurship, and all of that. And so I was seeing entrepreneurs and hearing entrepreneurs because I was interviewing them, and they were really just solving a problem. So I figured to
Mhm.
myself, why couldn't I solve this problem of just writing about us? And I ended up doing that and launching the blog in December of 2013. And things really kind of went from there.
Yeah, no, I it's that's just exciting and interesting. Again, when you people tell you things and you think and that's supposed to kind of be the answer and the only answer. And I just love that you went,
Right.
well, maybe that's what's happening here, but I'm going to need to see something else. And I also love that whole
Mhm.
thing about waiting and then realizing that you are the answer. So you
Right.
you have to go and do it. And so we're so glad
Right.
that you did.
Thanks. Yeah, and honestly, it's just been such a gift, right? I think also timing is really key in my, story. I think I launched a blog at a time when blogs were really big.
Hmm.
We're talking about the early 2010s, where there was a time where we definitely didn't have TikTok. Instagram was like, testing out certain
Hmm.
things. We had Black Twitter, yes, and when it was Twitter and not
Right.
X. And so it was a great time to have these types of conversations
Mhm.
rooted in the digital space.
Absolutely. Now, I know that you are passionate about, as you mentioned, kind of Afro-Latinidad and as well as Garifuna identities and
Mhm.
storytelling in this digital space. So tell us more about why you are drawn to them. How has it informed the evolution of your work in these areas?
Absolutely. Yeah, I think just I'm drawn to it in the sense that, like, I'm also a participant in all of it, right? Being that I am a Black woman that happens to be of Latin American descent by way of Honduras, my parents being raised there, or rather born there, me being raised in the Bronx and, having this hyphenated identity, like
Mhm.
all of my worlds sort of meld together. And also just knowing that, like, the digital space is a community. At
Yes.
least that's how I view it. And things have sort of shifted a bit, but for me, I've just gained so much from the community that has been created online.
Mhm.
And so, as like sort of this participant, I was just really looking for a space, or yeah, the space to even contribute to the current conversations and even, elevating certain conversations to kind of go specifically to like Garifunaidad, outside of my home, outside of the homes of my family members, outside of the Bronx. And I got to give a shout out to Brooklyn as well. And, New York City having the largest Garifuna population outside of our strongholds
Mhm.
in Central America, you know, media from the media lens, I didn't see, Garifuna discourse, right? I didn't see that
Mhm.
happening outside, and I'm specifically talking about traditional media, even digital media. I hadn't really seen, like, you saw things here or there, like I know the New York Times had done something here or there. I know
Mhm.
Savor, the food magazine, having, they'd done some coverage, but outside of things here or there, I really didn't see that discourse happening. And
Mhm.
so I felt like I used Ainsa Latina in particular. Yes, I was talking about being Black Latina, but I also felt it was really, really important to talk about being Garifuna, essentially.
Mhm.
And, you know, also anytime that I got the chance to write stories about our community, I did so like for Mezcla. I, you know, did like conversations around food and made sure that I highlighted intergenerational dynamics. I feel like that's really big when we talk about like the passing down of recipes and traditions. And so for me, all of those worlds sort of meld together.
Mhm.
And I'm grateful for that. And it's really kind of led to this work that's happening. But the digital space also has a really big part in that. And I know
Mhm.
I talk about the digital space and specifically social media with that. I know someone who I met through the digital space who I know has also been on the podcast is Pablo
Oh,
Lopez Oro, you know,
yes,
who is
yes,
love Pablo
yes. I
and
was
his
thinking the
work.
same thing.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, talk about brilliant,
Mhm.
you know, and I feel, and I met through the digital space and made sure that like I was consuming, you know, that research and that scholarship because I had never seen that happening before. And I don't think academia was hadn't seen that before.
Mhm.
And so, and then also shout out to Daisy Guzman, who's also doing work around Garifuna identity
Mhm.
and womanhood in New York City. And so, yeah, this is it's been a good time in the digital space, and I think that all these worlds are sort of melting together, and it really just has helped me to create in the process.
Mhm. I wanna go back, because we were talking before the show. You mentioned
Mhm.
majoring in Africana Studies or Black
Oh
Studies?
yeah, so yeah, so I actually I minored in Africana Studies and had a really interesting experience actually that kind of connects to all of this. But
Oh,
yeah, yeah, oh yeah, I can dive into that.
oh,
Um,
please, please. Yeah,
yeah,
absolutely.
so it's interesting. So I, like a true Sagittarius that I am, I actually in my undergrad took several semesters of Italian thinking I was going to study abroad in Italy.
Okay.
And two of my very great friends were telling me about a study abroad experience
Mhm.
called Perry Noir in Syracuse. Well, it's through my undergrad Syracuse, but we would be studying in Paris, and I dropped my vision to study in Italy and was like, oh, I need to be a part of this because like what like blackness in the city of
Mhm.
lights and you know
Mhm.
talking about expatriate community and the black diaspora in Paris, like it was just speaking so to my core. And
Mhm.
so I ended up studying abroad in Paris and with shout out to Professor Mays because that summer really impacted me so deeply because not only was I learning about like Countee Cullen and James Baldwin, um, but this was like outside of my own perspective and lens.
Mhm.
The first time that I was learning about Blackness outside of the United States,
Mhm.
specifically in France, and people who had intersectional identity. Like, I'm
Wow.
sure that like this was something that was like percolating before, but like it all clicked when I was there. And I said to myself through this 6 week experience, interacting and learning about people who were, you know, Black American, Black Parisians, or specifically Black Francophone, um,
Mm.
people were from Martinique, all these different places. Me being Black of Honduran descent, like, what does that mean in all of this?
Mhm.
And then I was starting to do some more research and I came across the term actually Afro-Latina at this time. And so it was really at
Mhm.
this moment where I was like, oh, I have a term for who I am. I have context and layers to my own experience, but it's not separate from an experience of Black folks across the diaspora. And so I think for me, though I wasn't like doing an immersion program in Latin America, it was so interesting to be able to like still see myself um,
Mhm.
very deeply in Black folks that were happened to be in France and their
Mhm.
stories. And so it all sort of led me on this also on this path of like understanding intersectional identity and the Black diaspora and ultimately identifying as Afro-Latina.
No, I think that's so important. I was just having a conversation with my students the other day about terminology and how it can be a game changer in some ways when there's actually a name for your identity and how you feel in a way that you feel very seen and represented and very visible. And so, yeah, like knowing that those terms exist, that you're not an anomaly, that there are
Hmm.
millions of,
Yeah,
of Afro Latinos out there, it is really empowering to have those tools at your disposal. Um,
absolutely.
I want to ask you, kind of digging a little bit more. So, in your work as a writer, as a communication specialist, especially in the digital arena, how do you think your work then helps us understand these communities, Afro Latin communities, transnationally in the U.S., surrounding issues of women? Because I know that's another area you focus on. How do you
Hmm.
think or how do you think you're helping people understand these communities?
Absolutely. I think such a great question. For one, I try to tell as many diverse stories as possible, with, of course, a focus on, whenever I can, like highlight specifically like Garifuna Americans. I definitely do that. And then also, of course, Afro Latina folk, like that's a focus. And so, like, anytime that I have the ability to document our stories. I definitely do that. And because of the way that specifically the media landscape exists, a lot of times that is, in the digital realm. But also the digital space, which, blessing and a curse, but it's great in this it's great in
So
the
great.
sense that right, it's like God, it's so many layers.
So many.
But yes, it's great in the sense that it has really there to me there's not as much gatekeeping as in other forms of storytelling. And so
Mm,
I think, for example, with creating my own platform, especially from having the background where, I have reported into people or,
mhm.
needed an editor for something, like I don't have to do that for my own platform, right? Like I can
Right.
literally publish what I want, when I want, how I want. And I've been able to do that specifically through that platform, whether it's the blog, whether it's my um, platforms, social media accounts, whether it's my personal social media accounts, I've been able to do that. I will note that the digital space, as we've been saying, and social media has changed a certain to a certain degree. So the freedoms that we see with that does come with certain concerns. But
Mhm.
I do have the option to do that. I think also with having that flexibility and freedom, I can pick up my phone and I can see what is happening based off of like maybe hashtags or whatever
Mhm.
my algorithm is serving me. I can see what's happening across the globe.
Yeah.
Similarly, people can do the same with my work, and we know with like sharing and reposting, and that has really helped as well. But
Mhm.
I think it really does kind of squash the barriers. Whereas in previous, times, specifically with media, you know, it's at the approval of an editor, it's at the approval of, you know, someone in power, and
Mhm.
we don't have to do that. And I think that's also why I just love the digital space, because I see specifically on platforms like TikTok where, and yes, TikTok has its downsides too, but
Mhm.
specifically with this next generation of storytellers, creators, they just click that red button and they are recording their thoughts,
Uh-huh.
they're actively showcasing what it is to think through things,
Mhm.
and then to invite people to also respond and also be in conversation with them. And so I think with my work, and why I enjoy, creating digitally, aside from some of the limitations and
Mhm.
downsides, is really not having to sort of wait for approval or have to. It just really essentially allows for more people to be impacted by that work,
Mhm.
and I will say that, like, I've been able to connect, you know, directly outside of my own family with people in Honduras and
Mhm.
people, in different countries,
Mhm.
simply because of this work.
Yeah, no, that's fantastic. And so in the storytelling that you do, have you determined kind of what are some urgent issues, some urgent concerns that people bring up again and again that need to be addressed for the Afro
Hmm.
Latinx community?
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely a number of them. I think an issue that I have sort of kept an eye on, and me, I think about it specifically for um, the Garifuna community, is, the digital space has brought the attention to a certain degree around the defending of land,
Mm, mhm,
specifically in Honduras. And this is not, even though I'm speaking to land defenders in Honduras, I know that across the globe, Black and Indigenous people
mhm.
are fighting to keep their land,
Yeah.
right? Are fighting to ensure that these lands that have been in our families, in our in our ancestral, um, or rather in our lineage, are
Mhm,
that they remain. And so for me, that's something that, like, I feel like is an urgent issue, right? And how do we not only amplify, but to continue to support land defenders? Because we see levels of land defense happening in the United States. Like, it's everywhere, right?
yeah, it
It's
is.
even, as someone that lives in the South Bronx, that sees rapid shifts and changes in my own neighborhood. It's no different than what's happening across the globe. And
Mhm,
so, but the fight looks different in the fact that, there may be certain levels of protection here versus in, let's say, Honduras. And
right.
so I think that is a big issue that I have kept an eye on.
Mhm,
And shout out to, the land defenders in Honduras, and the work that is happening, like Ofrena out there that's doing great work. Um, and so I would say that is a big issue.
mhm,
Another issue that is one that kind of stems from sort of what I describe as positive, is the digital space, right?
mm,
Censorship. That is
mm,
something that
mhm,
I also am sort of like thinking through, because while there were levels of censorship in the 2010s, I think that a lot of, particularly the tech founders, didn't realize how massive these platforms would grow. But once they did, obviously driven by capitalism. And when you're driven by capitalism, you have to continue to maintain um,
mhm,
that environment. And so a risk to that is any sort of dissent, or, people bringing up certain issues that are a risk to your bottom line.
mhm,
And we are seeing more and more of that today. And so I wonder, with folks getting shadow banned, with people whose platforms or their accounts just disappearing because they've been
Right.
reported, or maybe they even haven't even been reported. They somehow have just been escalated up and they no longer have an account.
Hmm.
What will that do to freedom of speech? What will that do to the connection that we currently see across the diaspora? I think that that is something that, I don't necessarily have an answer to, but I think it's something that, particularly in today's day and age, we do have to be mindful of. And I didn't, well, let me not say I didn't. I don't think people may have thought that this was going to be a big concern in the states as it's
Hmm.
shaping up to be, but I do think it is a big concern.
No, definitely. There's a lot going on in the digital space.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And
Absolutely.
we don't have the time to get into all of it, but it is, no, just suffice it to say, people should be paying very close attention to these.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And thinking about, because I know the conversation of like third spaces and what does, it look like to, of course, take community off of these platforms. That
Mhm.
is also something that, I think worth a discussion. But if we don't have these platforms, like we know that we'll still have community, right? Because we've
Right.
seen it and we've existed without it. But
Mhm.
what does that look like too?
Right. Right.
Yeah.
Well, I could talk all day with you, but I need to get to my closing question I ask everyone, is that in addition to your own work, and resources that we'll put on our website, what other kinds of resources would you recommend, for people who wanna learn more about not just what you do, but about the issues that you're passionate about, this digital storytelling, Garifuna identity? What would you suggest for them?
Yeah. Now I'm about to probably go through a number a
That's
number of
fine.
things because I I love these questions, but I always feel like I am going to forget folks, but I'm going to try my best to like highlight, ones that I have top of mind currently. And then, I know that these resources and individuals, their work will lead to, other folks' work that are, of
Mhm.
course, important. But given that, Garifunaidad is something that we discuss, of course, have to, re-mention the scholars that I mentioned earlier. So Pablo Lopez Oro and Daisy Guzman. I think their
Mhm.
work is really important. Um, Also keeping it in the Black Central American space, Nicole
Mhm.
Ramsey's work as well, also on the digital realm, but also intersecting with Garifuna identity. There's some really, really great platforms that exist that are very informative and celebrate our culture. So the Garifuna Market on Instagram and across social media, which was created by Cidia Alvarez. Also Garifuna Aerobics, which is another great platform,
Oh,
which was which was created by Arnold Martinez. And in addition to doing in-person classes that fuse, Garifuna music and dance genres, he also makes sure that he's informing people on, where these dance and music genres are from and its connection to our culture. So I think that's really important. Um, Also, I think about even in the influencer space, there's some influencers that I feel like have used their platform to educate people on Garifuna identity. So I think about Alexa Dolmo, who goes by the Alexa Darling on IG. She actually just launched a platform that really is supportive to the Garifuna community. So those in terms of the digital space. And then I'm going to just like, because I know I can be here all day, but books, well, let me not go into books right now, but in terms of like some platforms that I, feel like I've come up with in this digital community and are important as well as individuals. I think about Dash Harris, who has
Mhm.
Afro-Latino travel, and she also has the documentary Negro.
Mhm. Yeah.
There's she she's known as Bad Dominicana, but Zaira Kelly Cabrera, I feel like really big person in pioneering this sort of digital discourse from the Tumblr days. Um,
Mhm.
mhm. I think about Jasmine Hernandez, who has done work in the art space, but also speaking to Afro Latina existence. So she has a platform, Gallery Girls, um, another podcast, as well as platform started by Catalina, who's also goes by Gata, so Reggaeton con la Gata. Um, Another, person in the journalism as well as music space is Jennifer Mota. Um, I think about, I guess, transitioning to publishing. Actually, someone who has come up in my work and probably would have in some way, shape, or form shouted them out. But Veronica Chambers, who is
Yeah.
a Black Panamanian author,
Mhm.
Mama's Girl, as well as Secret Latina, which she published in early 2000s in Essence. Really important work that I feel like has shaped so many people, including myself. So I would note her work, and I feel like there's so many others. I know I don't want to like.
No, no,
You're
no. I
probably
mean,
like, stop rambling. No, I'm just.
no, no, this is great because again, some of the platforms and individuals I'm familiar with, some they are new, and so I'm like, I can't wait to
Hmm.
make this available for people on our resource pages so they can also check out these folks. So I really appreciate you mentioning as many as possible because again, it doesn't where else would we necessarily find out about this if you're not
Hmm.
recommending them specifically. So again, I know that there are so many more out there, but hopefully this will be a starting
Hmm.
point for people, or a continuation point for people who already know a little and want to know a lot more. So I
Hmm.
appreciate you sharing all of that. Again, just
Yeah.
highlights the work that people are out here doing,
Hmm.
and I'm hoping to
Absolutely.
talk to as many of them as I possibly can.
Yes. And one more in the
So
publishing space. Sorry, I cannot
yes,
forget
no.
Melania Luisa Marte, who has Plantains and Are Becoming. Uh, Talk
Mhm.
about phenomenal work of it's like part memoir, part poetry. I mean, it is poetry, but like infuses some really, really just life shaping,
Mm.
themes. And so I often return back to that book, which came out about 2 years ago, I want to say. So yeah, Melania as well. And I'm sure others will pop up right after this conversation.
No, well, and no worries. And again, if you think of anything you want to make sure I get on the resource page, let me know and we'll get that all put together. So, I
Absolutely.
will just say I've really enjoyed talking with you. Thank you so much for being a
Thank
part of
you,
this
Michelle.
conversation and for sharing your journey with all of us.
Yes, thank you so much. I really appreciate the space. I really and appreciate the work that you're doing. I think this is a part of that digital
Mhm.
content creation and storytelling work that we've talked about throughout the entire podcast episode. So thank you for the work that you're doing to ensure that our stories get amplified and told and archived.
Oh, it's my pleasure. All right. Well, thank you. Thanks for listening. Be sure to subscribe and hear more episodes of Dialogues in Afro-Latinidad on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and YouTube. And go to michellereedvasquez.com to check out our episode resources and learn more about the Afro-Latinidad Studies Institute.